Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today on this panel on housing and the shelter systems. I think it's going to be a really wonderful conversation. We've got some great guest panelists here today. And, because today's topic is a sort of housing and shelter, I can think of no more important way to begin the session than by acknowledging the land on which we all work, study, and live is traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. Today's session is being held online, and so a singular land acknowledgement doesn't always capture the kind of richness of our distribution across many locations. So as host, I can say for my part, I'm coming to you from Peterborough, Ontario, or Nagojunong, and I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that I'm on Treaty 20 Mississauga territory in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa First Nations, which are collectively known as the Williams Treaty First Nations. And I'd invite you all to take a moment and using the chat function, if you want, please acknowledge where you're coming from and what treaty or territorial lands you're on and where you're joining us from today, so you can acknowledge those First Nations who are the steward and caretakers of those lands and waters in perpetuity. So it's great to be here. We've got a lively discussion on all things housing and shelter related. And as we go along, I'd invite you to throw some questions into the chat. We might not have time to get to them all, but I will certainly do my level best to see whether I can prompt all the panelists to address the questions along the way. Let me first say thanks to Julie and her team at ShiftLink for pulling this conversation together. I know how busy everybody is, and so we're really appreciative of Julie and her team for prompting us to kind of come together and so we can all carve out some time to spend on these important topics. It's definitely our goal to create deeper connections across the sector and to spur on discussions and solutions so we can all better serve all those who are made vulnerable by the various systems within which they interact and we all work within. So without kind of further ado, I'm going to call upon each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and I'll give just a couple of questions here that I hope they might work into a little of warm introduction about themselves. Obviously, I'd love to hear about each of your role and experience in the sector. Maybe just a word or two on what motivated you to participate in this webinar, and one initial kickoff thought: what keeps you up at night with regards to human resources in your work? So why don't I'll start with Michael, if that's okay, and I'll go to Deborah and then Stephen.
Thank you very much. Michael Braithwaite. I'm with a group called Blue Door up in York Region, just above Toronto, where on any given day, there's about 1,500 people who experience homelessness. Blue Door's been around for about 38 years. We're the largest provider of emergency housing in the region, which sounds bigger than it is, because we still don't have enough or a lot. We also do secondary housing, healthcare programs, and we have an employment or construction social enterprise. What really motivated me to participate in this webinar really is, listen, our frontline staff do the heavy lifting. They do incredible work. And it's very stressful and taxing, and it's hard to keep them. It's hard to recruit. Now more than ever, we're trying to make sure everyone has a safe place to call home, to stay safe. And that's become, recruiting staff, keeping the staff has become even more difficult and more competitive. And what keeps me up is really, I never don't want to be able to serve our most vulnerable. And if we don't have the staff, we won't be able to do that. And to me, that's a growing concern. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael, for starting us off there. Let me go to Deborah next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm from Street Haven, which is in downtown Toronto. We provide multi-services in a number of occasions for women who are socially and economically marginalized. And I'm the executive director at Street Haven. I echo what Michael said and add that part of my motivation for saying yes to this panel was, one, Richard asked me, and I don't say no to Richard. Secondly, becoming part of a knowledge exchange and building a community of support is always an important part of the work that we do. And I was very pleased to be able to become part of that community. In terms of what keeps me up at night, it's my ongoing angst around not supporting staff enough and not informing them enough about what's going on. And that's particularly strong during this COVID world we're living in. And so I just wondered, did I do enough today? Because as Michael was saying, without staff, we can't do the work that's so important to all of us. And I have to say, there are some nights when I go to bed thinking, I think I did okay. And then about middle of the night, I wake up and go, no, I don't think I did. Don't know for sure. And I also want to note that Michael and I did not call each other to coordinate our black turtlenecks.
Duly noted, duly noted. Thank you very
Although
much.
It could be the new uniform if we want it to be.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks so much, Deborah. Let me finally go to Stephen.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. And yeah, too bad I didn't have one of those turtlenecks next time, perhaps. I am the Senior Manager of Programs at the Shepherds of Good Hope. And Shepherds is a transitional shelter and supportive housing provider for adults of all genders in Ottawa. Shepherds, we have a focus on harm reduction services. So for example, managed alcohol programs, supervised consumption and treatment service operating in the shelter. It's been a great 10 years here for me, and my role is overlooking the operations of all of these across the city. I wasn't told whether or not I was allowed to be plugging ShiftLink, but I will. I think they were my first and only cold call I accepted, and I'm very happy that I did, because it's been a complete game changer for the staff, the management, and really fitting for the theme, I think, in terms of just the spirit of this and the obligation I feel like we all have in terms of resource optimization. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing and that dialogue. And to answer your question about what keeps me up at night, other than not having a turtleneck on or the adrenaline from COVID, hands down for me, it's pivoting and learning how to best support employees' psychosocial needs. So, similar to my colleagues, and I think as we can all relate, it's that balancing act of individualizing supports for our staff while maintaining operational requirements and budgets and all those moving targets. And so happy to be here. Thanks.
Nice. Thank you very much, all. And just by way of very brief introduction as your host, my name is Jonathan Bennett. I'm the founder and a senior associate at Laridae. Laridae is a management consulting firm. We work only with nonprofit organizations right across the province and beyond. And we're primarily a strategy and training firm. We do a lot of strategic planning and operational planning, communications, branding type work. And then we also do a lot of training. And what kind of really drew me to want to participate as a host on this panel is over the last many years, we have hosted so many frontline and middle management training sessions. And I think housing and homelessness and the shelter systems are really valuable and vital to the whole ecosystem of social services across the province. And I just thought, if I could make a little contribution here today, that would be pretty great. So, thank you for inviting me, and let's jump in a little further then. So, I have a question for Stephen to begin with. How is your organization dealing with staff that go between sites, given COVID, given restrictions, and all that sort of stuff? How have you been dealing with that?
We're very fortunate in the sense that we already had an established partnership with health organizations prior to the pandemic who are directly working in our shelter and in our housing programs, RNs, RPNs, PSWs 24/7 alongside frontline staff. And so we've really leaned in on them and continue to do so, but especially surrounding recommendations for our IPAC measures. early on, as I'm sure we all were following with the ever-changing guidance, and we saw the trend going, so we called every employee. We wanted to just keep a pulse on who worked other jobs, and being a unionized work environment, we're meeting frequently with the union leadership, communicate, hear any of their pressure points that we needed to consider. And so for us, we're monitoring all of our sites on virtually a shift-to-shift basis, and then do have staff working across all units on a day-to-day basis. What we have seen and what has been demonstrated, and perhaps with a healthy dose of luck, is that the IPAC measures the screening, the mandatory PPE very early on, the enhanced cleaning, the isolation, are effective in keeping employees and just as important, clients safe. And so it's daily monitoring and daily checking in, and so far it's been quite effective.
That's great. That's great, Stephen. Thanks for that. Deborah, any additional thoughts from your perspective? What's happening at your organization?
Well, because we're multi-service, there was a period of time where some of our services was shut down. And so staff from that service were then deployed to our 24/7 sites. So there was a bit of an ebb and flow. So we, at the very beginning of the pandemic impact, we were able to continue services where we needed to continue services. And I'm very pleased to say that unlike 80% of nonprofits in the province, we did not have to lay off anyone. And that's partially because of the redeployment. Again, like what Stephen was saying, we were very devoted, and some might say anal, around IPAC and our policies and procedures. There were COVID-related HR policies that were developed, and part of that was to know for our staff, where else they were working, so that we would then understand. And part of the form they filled out was, what is the IPAC protocol at the other places you were working, so that we could have a sense of what the risk might be when they're with us. It also was a way for us to keep an eye open if there was an outbreak at organization B and they're working at organization B. Okay, what does that mean for us? So it's about constant communication. From March the 11th, I sent out to all staff and all relief staff, which is where ShiftLink really comes in for us. And yes, I'll second plug the thank you to ShiftLink. It's for our relief staff. And so a daily COVID-19 update went out with sort of public updates, sort of the environment updates, and then what's happening within Street Haven. And I think that was sort of, I'm hoping, a sort of equalizer, stabilizer for staff that would be going to different sites. So when our relief staff would come into one site for shift A, let's say, and then another site for shift B the next day, they'd have a sense of continuity and safety because the protocols were the same across. And the expectation around compliance with public health directives was as strong for permanent part-time staff as it was for relief staff, to the point where if we found out there was non-compliance with policies that we'd put in place, there was discipline as possibilities. And we also are in consultation with our union around what we're doing. There's some agreement about our stringency, and then there's some disagreement, but so bottom line, I think it's as long as we're providing a comfort zone around safety and consistency, the ebb and flow of staff from location to location I feel fairly confident about the risk mitigation.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I have a follow-up sort of question for you, Deborah, then, and maybe I'll get Michael's thoughts on this one too. What happens when clients can't be serviced due to kind of missed care? What if there's no staff available? How have you been dealing with that?
Well, that would be the nightmare that would keep me up all night that you referenced earlier.
Right.
Because we provide 24/7 services, it's not an option. So there have to be staff there all the time. So it might be that we would redeploy staff from one location to another. In our shelter, because of shelter standards in Toronto, there must be 2 people on shift.
Okay.
At least, and there we have 2 shelter locations, so sometimes there's more than 2, so that third person could then go somewhere else if needed. Then we have our relief pool, which we would call in, which is where ShiftLink connects to us. If that fails, then we have sort of as our sort of tertiary support is an employment agency. And then if that really fails, then you're stuck with management coming in. So it isn't an option for us. So at the very least, what would happen would be a shift would be very leanly supported. Okay. And so clients might get different support and care, but there wouldn't be a circumstance where there would be no staff person available to support. Okay.
Okay, that's great. Michael, how about you? What happens when clients can't be serviced to missed care? What happens if there's no staff available?
Well, fortunately, that hasn't happened yet. I think what's happened across the sector right now is that we've seen political will and we've seen some resources thrown at this. It's not a new issue that we have homelessness that is growing across Canada, across the GTA. But when your number one message is stay at home to stay safe and people don't have homes, so there's a lot of money thrown at this. And what that meant was across the GTA, there was new programs. There was isolation sites, transition sites, hotels opening. And, you know, thankfully, they reached out to organizations like Blue Door to say, can you run this isolation site? And that means your staffing is stretched further. So it's been very difficult. We're stretching our staff. You're opening new sites. You're having to add people rapidly, as Deborah talked about. We do work with staffing agencies on occasion, but it's not, it's great that they could do that in a pinch, but the quality sometimes suffers, right? Because if you have someone coming in who doesn't know all your routines, who's not familiar with it, they may not provide that highest level of quality that your clients need going forward, right? So that's the tough thing too. And also, the camaraderie among staff too, when you're spreading them out and stressing them out, it does suffer. So we haven't had to not provide care yet, but it's been very, very stretched due to additional services being added. And right at the beginning too, when we didn't know as much about COVID as we do now, there was more panic too, and people not wanting to come in and having fears about coming in due to it. It seems to be we have a better handle on it now, and that panic, although people are still a little nervous, the panic level isn't as high because of all the things Stephen said. We've worked with public health. We've made sure people are safe. We've made staff safety a priority, and as we should.
Maybe just a bit of a follow-up, Michael, and I'll hear from the others if you've got anything to add. When staff are getting pushed, when they are getting kind of pushed to the limit, when workplace culture starts to suffer or mental health starts to encroach upon the workplace because of the difficulty of working through COVID, what kinds of things as an organization have you done to sort of address or support these difficult times?
Well, we have something called a wellness committee, and that wellness committee works hard around making sure that our team has the mental health supports they need, giving them a lot of different resources to help with mental and physical health. This is a tough time for everyone. Staff are being overworked. Clients' needs are higher. So we have to, as organizations, we have to take care of our team. That should be a number one priority. We do that through our wellness committee. We do some fun stuff. We get together as a larger team, all virtually, of course, and try and keep that momentum going forward as well, right? And we also have a health and safety team that, everyone has to have one of those, but they put a lot of information out. They take a lot of the questions and fears that come from the staff. So it's not coming from management, it's coming from their health and safety team. Say, we hear you, here's what we're gonna do. Sometimes it works, sometimes we have to improve upon it. So then we're gonna improve and do that. And that's been very helpful as well to keep people motivated and know that we do care and staff health is a priority.
Totally. Stephen, anything to kind of add there? Anything that through COVID has been surprising in terms of how you've been able to support staff? Any new initiatives or programs, or some similar things maybe to Michael?
Similar, and I often wonder if this line of work, even pre-COVID, if the work being done is an impossible job, and not that the work isn't incredibly impactful and needed, but for the reasons in terms of just stressors and unknowns and anxiety and safety, right? And so I think, just as an example for us, it wouldn't be uncommon for staff to literally be running 4 or 5 times in a day to respond to an overdose in the middle of a sidewalk. Then you mix in the rain and the full COVID PPE. It's unbelievable. And so it's a top priority for us. The art and the science, the balance is trying to support everyone and tailor those supports. The communication has been really important to us, because I think a lot of us feel that fatigue with always ever-changing information and sifting through it. And so we've got a small but mighty comms team that does a really good job of, on a weekly basis, summarizing everything from, hey, this benefit for parents is available if you apply, and even mix in some TikToks from the staff and getting them involved, because we can kind of have fun too, I think, or try to have some fun in the midst of this, and just really, as Michael alluded to, not just a top-down approach, but really trying to get everyone involved and lead, and that's been a big motivator for the team.
Nice. I've got another question for you, Deborah, but just before I do, anything to add there that has been new or different over this difficult time, or kind of some similar things?
I think a lot of yes to what everybody said, but I think because we're a women's organization, we might be able to do things a bit differently. And I only say that because I don't know how it would go in a mixed gender organization. We do things like pajama day. So all the staff at the shelter come in onesies and pajamas, and we buy them. So we buy crazy pajamas at Walmart or wherever. Bad hair day. And so I don't know how that would play out in mixed environments, but in the shelter and in our addiction treatment in resident program, that's worked out very well. I asked the board of directors if they would be interested in supporting staff. And so each staff person got a $10 Timmy's card that said, take a break on the board.
Nice. Okay.
Kind of doing stuff like that, and team meetings, constantly reinforcing the message that this sucks for all of us. Home life, personal life, and work life have intersected like they never have before. And particularly at the beginning, when we were very conscious of being in what they were calling then, and I don't call it, but in lockdown, you went from home to work. Then you went back to home, maybe to the grocery store for a sense of excitement. But, and what does that mean then when you're at work, where it's becoming much harder in terms of the work that we're doing? The clients are much more stressed. We're seeing greater complexity in the mental health issues, and then the acting out of those issues, and then the triggering of trauma. So we just, on a regular basis, on a daily basis, do check-ins at the beginning of shifts and check-outs at the end of shifts, and just acknowledging that it's hard, and reminding each of us to be kind to ourselves, and then be kind to our colleagues who might today not have come in 100%. But what I always say to staff, you don't have to be 100% every day, but if you're going to come in today and all you can give us is 60%, we need 100% of that 60%, and we'll cover the slack. But just let's know what we're doing and doing it together. So I'm not sure if some of that could translate to other organizations. I'm not sure about the PJ Day, but but I'll leave that up to the better judgment of everybody who's on the call today.
Sure. But thanks for that. Deborah, I got kind of like a follow-up type question here, and it's really around recruitment. As sort of Stephen was alluding to before, just working in this sector can be difficult, and recruiting sometimes can be difficult just under normal circumstances. How's recruitment been going over the last 9 months? What new or different things have you had to try in order to kind of stay on top of things? And I'll go to others after I begin with Deborah.
I guess for us, our awareness of the challenges around recruitment really informs our absolute commitment to retention. And what can we do to retain the staff that we have, if we have enough staff, which we never do because there is a regular flow. The challenge has been around COVID is that either people are stuck at one place because they're in a zone where, or their long-term care facility, let's say, will only allow you to work at one place. So that's shortened the list of potential employees. So we've basically not been creative, I have to say. We've gone with what we usually do, which is Charity Village. Mm-hmm. And we've always had good response from Charity Village. And then sort of friends of friends. But I go back to, if we don't need to expand our pool, trying very hard to keep the staff that we have, so that it's hard enough figuring out what to do during COVID without having to figure out all the other protocols and procedures in an organization. So we'd like to retain that organizational history with the retention of staff, and then just add on the COVID complexity. I know that's not very satisfactory answer, sorry.
No, that's okay. Maybe, and Deborah, there's an interesting question coming in here on the chat. How can we include Indigenous, Black, Brown, New Canadian, Latinx, Asian, LGBTQ, Canadian visibility in our labor, and I guess in our employment, people that we employ, and those that we serve. So what are you doing around issues of diversity in terms of your hiring practices?
We have made a very strong commitment to diversity in the last, I would say the last 18 to 20 months. And certainly a lot of the work that we do is done by Black women and women of color, traditionally. And so I just did a survey of recent hires in the last 2 years, and 85% of our hires were Black women and women of color. We've only hired one Indigenous person, and I am very aware of our leadership team is culturally not diverse, and that is our commitment to mentoring and a leadership program that we are launching in the new year for Black and women of color employees.
Thank you, Deborah. I really appreciate your answer. And thanks very much to the question from MJR. I feel like I'm doing a little cross-country checkup here or something. So maybe I'm going to kind of put the same question to the other two and talk to me about recruitment, talk to me about increasing diversity on your teams. How have things been going, and what are you kind of doing on that from that perspective? Let me go to Michael first, and then Stephen.
Well, I think, you're somewhat limited around creativity around recruitment, but I think, it's up to all of us to build our brand, right? To make your place of work a destination that people want to go to, where people can feel the passion. Frontline workers, unfortunately, are not paid enough in this line of work. And let's, all work towards changing that moving forward. But I think make it a destination where people want to have the same passion as you. So when I do a lot of stuff on social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, just talking about the mission, the purpose. We're looking for people and sharing that. And that, to me, you get connected to passionate people who share it with people, and that's a different recruitment strategy, right? It doesn't really cost us anything except my time. And we do that as an organization as well. And you're building your brand. People want to be a part of something good. They don't want to do good and they want to be a part of a movement. And that's what we try and create through social media. And I think we've had some success that way, where people have said, hey, when there's an opportunity at Blue Door, let me know. I want to be part of the good work you're doing.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. And I mean, probably as all of us know, you have one of the, the biggest sized presences out there in social media. You do a great job, and Blue Door is always in my feed. So that's great. And your podcast, of course. Let's go to Stephen. Recruitment and diversity.
Yeah, from a blood, sweat, and tears perspective, I mean, we have not stopped the recruitment strategy for 8 consecutive months, probably 6 or 7 days a week. But so we would generally hold career fairs where we had a lot of success, and now we've shifted those to virtual, and those are to be determined in terms of how successful. But to Deborah's point, recruitment is really about retention, and we find that, especially with the new hires, the biggest risk to someone not staying is just, are you getting the proper onboarding, training, and mentoring from the start, and that connection with the supervisors? And so really prioritizing that perspective is what we've focused on, from the shift supervisor, middle management, to senior leadership team, is how do we build that connection? And I think we really need to challenge ourselves in terms of qualifications and in our line of work. And so what's the most important? And we're really looking at competencies, values, as opposed to learned skills. And so empathy, flexibility, patience, compassion, as opposed to a master's degree. And I think it's on us as the employer that we can and should be training our staff. We can train those skills, but what's the most important? And it's those competencies, those intangibles. And I feel like, and I'll segue into a bit of the diversity, is really challenging some of those systemic barriers that may be preventing from that diversity, if that is the case. And so, similar to Deborah, we have a diverse staffing group, but where we need to make improvements is on our leadership team. And so really prioritizing that and bringing in the experts to teach us how to do that.
Thank you, Stephen. You pivoted to something that I am always interested in, which is middle management. I have long held the opinion that as a sector, we love to find our very best frontline workers and promote them into management and then abandon them. And we don't do it, we just do it because we're busy. And in a way, we kind of like extract the talent from the front line and just assume that they'll just somehow magically intuit how to be really good managers. And so, a lot of the work we do at Laridae is training middle management to be more effective at what might seem like basic things, but is actually pretty difficult. Suddenly you're managing your former colleagues, and you're doing performance management and time management, and you've got to learn how to delegate and manage budgets. And this stuff can be tough. I'm really curious, what kinds of supports do you put in place for your middle management to be more successful over time? What kind of trainings and supports as an organization do you look to support them? Maybe I'll just kind of go around. Deborah, any thoughts on that, on the middle management piece?
I agree with you in terms of how the sector does lack consistency in supporting middle management or frontline going into a supervisory position, which then could lead to a more senior management position. We're a fairly small organization. We've got, I would say, about 80 staff. So our leadership team is really our management team. Okay. And then there are supervisors. So there is individual support in terms of personal and professional development that each employee, we have, that's a solid budget line for us. And then in each team providing opportunities for people to try things. So being part of an interview, for instance, seeing what that's like. we do some shadowing staff, not necessarily your manager, but another manager in terms of what that looks like. And trying to have everybody understand each other's position. So one of the things we are doing in the organization is cross-training, so that if you're in addiction services, you then would spend some time over in housing services, because our clients are the same. It's just, where have you intersected with them in terms of their needs for support? So that is a way of, I think, increasing your constellation of competencies so that you feel confidence, and you then might be able to look at opportunities as they arise at Street Haven, but also across the sector. So you might be a frontline person at Street Haven, but because of this sort of cross-training and shadowing and mentoring, you might then feel confident to be able to go to another organization that has a lead position or a supervisor position. So we're not necessarily committed to hanging on to people, although we hope people will want to stay, but more that we need to build up the level of professionalism and confidence in the sector from which we will all benefit. So that's sort of how we approach it. So there is a leadership commitment and programs and strategy in place, but then there's that day-to-day piece that as part of our developing culture, that we all learn from each other, and that hopefully people will move on to other areas of interest as they can.
Very nice. Thank you very much for that. That was super interesting. Michael, any thoughts around middle managers or supervisors? How do you go about mentoring and supporting your folks?
I think pretty simply, don't crucify them for mistakes, and celebrate when they do things really well, and point that out and share that. Right? People are going to make mistakes. They own them, move on, give them the tools to do their job, and make sure you're celebrating. It's tough work, and many of them are learning on the job. So, understand that people are going to make mistakes, and really celebrate when they do something amazing, just like you would with any other staff.
Cool. Any thoughts, Stephen, on that?
I love that piece in terms of celebrating the successes. I mean, the reality is we're all just as valuable, regardless of title. And the reality for middle management is most of the time staff don't always see what's going on in the background. And then the senior leadership doesn't ever really appreciate what's going on either. And so you're getting expectations from both ends, but similar to Deborah, a real strong emphasis from us in terms of professional development. And that is a strong budget line. And at the end of the day, the bottom line cost is always a struggle with not-for-profits, but what can we do from a non-budgetary, non-fiscal support? And that is providing flexibility and autonomy with scheduling, and being able to break down the silos in the organization and have a matrix style of workplace where it's appropriate to collaborate. And so, yeah, and also balancing expectations. I think we live in this society where it's immediate gratification, and sometimes you hear, oh, I think I've plateaued after a year in management. And so just kind of going through truly, and I don't want to go into the cliches, but management versus leadership, and it does take time and commitment.
Yeah.
Well, I keep offering my position up, but nobody's taken me up on that offer yet.
It looks too hard from where everybody's sitting. So let's ask about volume here, and what you've seen in terms of changes. I read recently, I think it was the Toronto Foundation put out a report on the volume during the pandemic of needs of social services, and how much things have gone up. Calls into 211, that kind of thing is really shot up. I'd be interested in, kind of a two-part question. One, what have you seen? Any kind of unusual types of anomalies that are sort of, specific to the pandemic? And secondly, how have you responded? What kinds of creative, operational kinds of changes or things have you needed to do to make it all work tough question, but these are tough times. So let's dig in a bit. Deborah, what's been your experience? And then I'll go to Michael.
I think for us, women, generally speaking, have disproportionately been negatively affected by COVID. So there's sort of that foundational piece that we're dealing with. What we've observed in terms of the clients that we support is, and I alluded to it earlier, is the complexity of the mental health challenges. And then that feeds over to back to substance use. And what does that then mean? And the crisis of the opiate overdoses. I mean, there have been more deaths in the last few months than there have been in a number of years. So it's become this perfect storm of traumatic response to a crisis where you feel you have no control, and in fact, you likely don't, to whatever sort of sense of community or sense of stability you had being evaporated overnight, it feels like. And so that's then within the shelter system, at least. Our shelter used to support 50 women and now only supports 27 because of social distancing. Right. And so the feel is even different. So on an individual client basis, we're seeing that play out in behavior, which can be challenging for the other clients in the environment and also in staff and responding. I have to say that I think, and I know this call is not Toronto centered, but I have to say the city has responded remarkably well considering the huge bureaucracy that it is. And there have been lots of bumps along the way, but the hotel response, we are managing a hotel shelter, and that has provided 50 other women a place to be safe. And for us, that's a critical piece during COVID. And as winter is now upon us, being safe, being warm. And as we often say, our clients say that they feel invisible and unheard. And I think it's critical during these times that we are very diligent around hearing what's happening around us, trying to respond, and making sure that everyone feels seen. And I think that that's the best we can do at this point in time. And if we can do that successfully, we'll get to the other side of what this looks like. And new normals will become regular normals, I hope, in some ways. We'll never go back to some things that didn't work and should never have worked, but we had to live with.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what a great answer. Let me go to Michael for your thoughts on that one. I'm also just mindful that there's some interesting questions coming in on the chat, so I'm going to try to loop back to some of these. If the panelists could take a little look, that'd be great. Michael, on this, what are volumes like and how are you responding?
Well, the way we do service really has changed. And so in York Region, clients were forced to go to a transitional site before then they were vetted out to different emergency providers in the area. So what we saw is we actually saw a decrease in youth accessing. A lot of people really struggle, people experiencing homelessness struggle with the isolation part and the fear of isolation. So, you know, as you've seen across the GTA, you've seen encampment levels grow. So people out, and even though there's been this massive effort to provide housing and housing options, those encampments are still there. For us, for the youth, they were saying there's no way I can stay, isolated for 14 days going forward. And so it wasn't like youth homelessness decreased; they just weren't accessing service. There's a decrease in service, places where you could just go for drop-ins, right? Because obviously because of distancing. So. It has changed the way we do it, but we also see, I mean, this is pointed out that housing is really the answer, supportive housing, not emergency shelter, because in many emergency shelters, you've got double rooms, it's crowded, there's lots of people around, out of the cold, in from the cold type of programs too. I think that politically, you know, they're starting to understand that housing, long-term housing with supports is not only is it the more humane and the way to go to end homelessness, but it's also the more affordable thing to do as well. So this has really changed, you know, not so much for us, it's forcing us to change how we do things. and the strategies that we go about to house people.
Thank you. That's great. Stephen, again, thoughts on you, or just sort of reflections on how volumes have changed, what people's needs have been, how has that been different under the pandemic, and how have you responded?
It's interesting because in Ottawa, seeing similar trends to my
Okay.
colleagues in the Toronto GTA area, in the sense that at the beginning, the summer months, we saw our services being accessed less. You know, for the first time, people weren't getting kicked out of parks just because they were homeless, and accessing outdoor space, and also fear and anxiety with just staying in a room with 6 other strangers. And so as we head into the colder months, we're starting to see the needs increase. It was pretty eye-opening for us just to see the need in the community. And I think we started to understand things a little deeper when we started cohorting meal services based on where you physically stayed in the shelter, and then from community clients. And so in the summer months, we actually moved everything outside, the drop-in things outside, because we could. And with that was a really good exercise in appreciating what people's needs are, in the sense that we know there's a lot of good services out there, but we also know that people aren't always accessing them all the time. And I believe that's because people don't want to be inside all day, every day. We have now really pivoted and prioritized building purpose-built space outside into our programming. And so we're working really closely with the city right now in terms of building a 16-hour indoor-outdoor purpose-built drop-in space. And so, for example, we actually used to not allow people to stay in the shelter 24/7, but when COVID happened, we did allow that, and just to create that physical distancing, less movement out in the community. But people still weren't doing it. Why? Because they want to be outside. Who doesn't want to be outside, smell the fresh air? And so really looking at all of our units and how can we do better purpose-built outdoor space that still meets everyone's needs. And that's really been something we are focusing on now.
Wow, that's really interesting, and a pretty sort of unexpected thing to come out of COVID. I'm curious, just to stay with this just for one more minute, if I could. Deborah, have you seen anything like that in Toronto? Has there been any kind of move around indoor-outdoor purpose-built space to accommodate, or is that new to you?
I haven't heard of it. I know that people have been allowed to be in public spaces more during the day in groups. There is the challenge of encampments and the disruption of encampments. But no, I think that's brilliant. And so I think Ottawa has a lot to teach Toronto.
That's great. I'm seeing just some really interesting questions come in here on the chat. I might try and pose one and look to which of the three of you might want to jump in on it. It's the kind of the most recent one that's come in here from an anonymous question. I'm wondering whether the panelists could provide, whether the panelists provide frontline staff with clinical supervision or other clinical supports through work. If so, how do they find that makes a difference? Any tips for agencies thinking about adding a clinical position to a housing organization?
Yes, please.
Yes, Deborah, you jump in.
Yes, please. I would like to have that position available.
Right. You would like it funded is what you're saying.
Yes, please.
Yes.
And we don't have that resource. And so we are very clear that our case management, and I know there is not consistency around what case management is, but for us, it is nothing that is clinical in nature. And so you are more managing systems and managing the support to the client. You are not providing any clinical interventions. And so we're very clear about that. And we know that that's a deficiency in our shelter and housing services. We do have some clinical support in our addiction services, but that's related to addiction and mental health. We do have some partnerships that are COVID evolving around mental health in the hotel shelter and in our regular shelter. So going back to what you had said earlier with regards to COVID, some of these deficiencies I think have been so highlighted and the needs confirmed to be overwhelming within the population that we support, that resources are being found, if not for long term, at least in the interim. But I think it's absolutely essential to have the integration of mental health support along with the case management support, certainly within the shelter environment and supportive housing environment. And I go back to what Michael says, the complicated and easy solution to most of this is housing, affordable, sustainable housing.
Great. Let me go to Michael on that one. Talk to me about, do you have to partner for clinical supports? Do you have someone staff? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, so right now we've seen the impact of having clinical staff brought in during the pandemic in partnership. We see that housing and health are linked and always have been, always will be. But you just said the key word right there, Jonathan, is partnership, right? We can't be everything to everyone. I think if you water down your focus too much, so there are people that do this work well and are professionals and are looking. So if you could provide the space and provide the clients and do that seamlessly, and I think that happens across the GTA. I understand too. So if I was to go out today, if we were to go out of Blue Door and hire a nurse practitioner or a social worker, someone that I don't have the qualifications to supervise. You also can work in partnership, and sometimes it's paid, but sometimes it's pro bono to supervise that individual as well. So if you're thinking of adding that person to the staff, try and work with someone locally, a partner that can offer that clinical supervision to you at no cost or minimal cost, or have them actually do that where you're either partnering where they're bringing in the work or you're contracting them to do that. Those would be my thoughts.
Awesome. And Stephen, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I constantly have to remind myself how fortunate we are, because we do have this partnership established and for 20 plus years. And to Jonathan or Michael's point, sorry, we don't do it ourselves, but we have a strong partnership with the experts that do, right built into the shelter and housing programs. And so we have with Ottawa Inner City Health that does that for us. And so we have outreach mental health and addiction workers on site providing clinical support. We have psychiatrists that make their rounds in. We have a medical director. And so I kudos to the shelters that don't necessarily have that on site, because I don't know how we would respond to the needs like overdoses, et cetera, without their support. And being able to do this, you can really leverage the different levels of government. And so from the provincial with the healthcare, and then you from our side, the municipal with the city, right? And just really leveraging, because no one funding agreement in and of itself is usually enough. And so really trying to do that strategically, and that's been a real big benefit. And so we're at the point now where we're operating essentially a mini hospital right in the shelter. And so we take authority from ambulances instead of going to the hospitals and tying up the emergency rooms unnecessarily just because they're intoxicated. That transfer of care is given to the 24/7 nurses in the shelter. And so we can do things a lot more economically affordable for everyone as well. And so really just leveraging those partnerships and then you have the support right there on site when staff need it most, I think too, right? And so not going home perhaps right after or the next week and calling someone you don't know, we can provide those psychosocial supports on shift. So.
Wow. Great question from our anonymous attendee. I wish you put your name down there and then we could celebrate your excellent question. We've just got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask each of you for a final thought. And, you know, I'm a consultant and I ask strategic planning type questions all the time. So that's where my head goes. Imagine it's the end of 2021. What things do you hope for our sector? What lessons learned? What things do you hope that we will have come out of this with and somehow be stronger, more resilient? Let me start with, oh, none of you want to go first. I can see it on your faces. Let me start with Michael.
Well, if anything, if we didn't see the value before of the heroes on the front lines in housing and homelessness, I hope that there's a new appreciation for people who do this work. They're literally saving lives every day. And I think that value has to be reflected in wages as well. You know, quite often we hear, you know, we're not paid enough, and they're absolutely right. And so I think we have to work harder and work with our partners and our government funders to recognize that as well within the framework of dollars we already have. How do we pay those frontline workers more value? Even when they were getting pandemic pay for a short while, people said, I finally felt comfortable, and then, you know, it rolled back. So how do we get it to that level once again? That's my hope, is the values there, but also lessons learned from here. Here's what we learned, right? That when there's political will and there's resources, we house thousands of people in a matter of months, and what normally would take us a number of years. We can do it. We just need the resources and political will. If we said today that we had, you know, the vaccine for COVID, but we were going to sit on it for a while and maybe we couldn't afford it, people would lose their minds. Why is that? Because people are dying. People are getting very sick from this pandemic, from this. But homelessness is no different. People are dying. Deborah talked about the overdoses, the people dying on the streets. We have the knowledge. We, in a sense, have the cure. We know what to do. We just need the political will and resources to make that happen. I hope this is that silver lining throughout this pandemic.
Really well said, Michael. Thank you so much. Let me, in a minute or so, let me go to Deborah and then to Stephen.
Well, following up on what Michael said, I think that, you know, the crisis of homelessness, I think, has been highlighted during COVID, and highlighted, I mean, to the general public. So it has become part of our consciousness, and I don't want to lose that. I would hate to lose that. And so hopefully we'll keep that as a thread as we move forward. I hope that the partnerships that came together under crisis will have longevity, and we'll see value in the shared work that we did under these extraordinary circumstances, and that we see then that these partnerships become our ordinary and what we expect of each other. We went through COVID from prevention and safety to, which is sort of more on the physical, to getting now, I feel we're in the position now where we're now looking at taking care of the mental health of ourselves, our colleagues, our clients, and there is great value in that. So I hope that at the dawn of 2021 or 2022, I guess, as we get through the year, that we remember the value in the connection between our mental health well-being and how that contributes to the well-being and vibrancy of our communities. And that doesn't just come by happenstance. It has to be intentional, and intentional in the sense of community resources. And COVID has shown, if nothing else, it's shown that where there is a will, there's a way, and money can be found. And so we just need to keep feeding that particular process, so that the things that matter, that we saw that matter during COVID and that we got through until the rest of 2021, not only will matter in 2022, but will be forefront and will be funded.
Awesome. Awesome. Stephen, last 15 seconds for you. Keep it tight. Let it rip.
Yeah, you know, pre-COVID, we all had the ambitions to collaborate, but we're also busy. And what I really appreciate here in Ottawa is just that genuine collaboration. And frankly, I think my counterparts probably have to see me much more than they would like to, but it's been highly beneficial, just really coming together. And if for nothing else, just empathizing with each other's challenges and
awesome.
And being there. So
great. Great. Well, as you probably all saw, Michael needed to jump off. He had something right sharp at 2. So thank you so much to him. Thank you so much to Deborah and to Stephen, to Julie and her whole team at ShiftLinks for hosting us. This has been a fantastic conversation. I hope the first of many, and stay safe out there. Take it easy. Bye.